I would like to announce the imminent publication of my audiobook, Quine, on the analytic synthetic distinction. WVO Quine tried to prove that no statement is necessarily true. In this work, Quine's argument is stated, analyzed, and shown to be a broken argument for a false conclusion. It is shown that necessary truths are as important as empirical truths to the empirical sciences. The reason being that without necessary truths, there is no way to organize or to interpret data. It comes to light that, in addition to being false, every form of extreme empiricism is so incoherent that it cannot even be clearly stated without thereby being refuted. Please enjoy the following promotional excerpt from the audiobook itself, professionally narrated by A. Zenz, and soon to be available for purchase at audible.com.
Why there are necessarily true propositions. A proposition is a truth or a falsehood, i.e., it is what is meant by a sentence that is either true or false. To say of a sentence S that it is true is to say that S bears a truth. To say of a proposition P that it is true is to say that P is a truth. If a proposition P is necessarily true, then a sentence that expresses P is analytically true. Incidentally, Saul Kripke denies this, but his reasons for doing so are spurious. This is demonstrated in section 3.0 of Existence and Necessity. First, a terminological point. If a proposition is true, but it isn't necessarily true, it is contingently true or just contingent. And if a proposition is false, but it isn't necessarily false, it is contingently false. It seems clear that some truths are contingent. Gore might have become president in 2001. He didn't. Bush became president instead, but Bush didn't have to become president, so it's a contingent truth that Bush became president. In general, things don't have to be the way they are. They could be different. In any case, this is what we think, and it is what we'll assume in this context. Given this assumption, we must ask the following question. Are any propositions necessarily true? Yes. Why is this? Because the assumption that no propositions are necessarily true is self-undermining. Let me now explain why. For argument's sake, suppose that NN, no propositions are necessarily true. First of all, is NN itself necessarily true or not? It has to be one or the other. If NN is a necessary truth, it's a counterexample to itself and is therefore false. So let's suppose for argument's sake that NN is contingently true. In that case, it could be false. In other words, there is some possible world W where some proposition P is necessarily true. A proposition is necessarily true if and only if it's true in all possible worlds. So given that P is necessarily true in W, it follows that P is true in every world. Thus, P is true in our world, and P is true in every world. Thus, P is necessarily true in our world, and NN is therefore false. To sum up, NN is self-defeating if it's necessarily true, and NN is self-defeating if it's true, but not necessarily so. Therefore, NN is false. A similar argument. If NN is true, then the statement Roman numeral 1, P isn't necessarily true, necessarily follows the statement Roman numeral 2, P is a proposition, and it is therefore a necessary truth that Roman numeral 1 isn't false if Roman numeral 2 is true. So NN cannot be true unless it's false, and it's therefore false.